Kamala Harris, the 49th and incumbent Vice President of the United States, announced her 2024 campaign for president on July 21, 2024, after President Joe Biden withdrew his bid for re-election and endorsed her earlier the same day. Harris became the official nominee on August 5 and selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate the following day. Harris, a member of the Democratic Party, rose to national prominence in 2016 during her campaign for the United States Senate. She became more widely known when she sought the party's nomination for the 2020 presidential election but withdrew from the race in 2019. She endorsed Joe Biden and was chosen to be his running mate in 2020. After Biden and Harris won the general election, she became the first female vice president of the United States upon her inauguration in 2021. Harris advocates a similar domestic platform to Biden, supporting national abortion protections, LGBT+ rights, and legislation to address climate change. She also supports environmental justice and reforms to the immigration system. On foreign policy, she similarly opposes the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but has been more sympathetic to Palestinians during the Israel-Hamas war in comparison to Biden. However, she has not explicitly signaled a policy change on Gaza. Harris is the first woman of color to be nominated for president by a major political party, following Hillary Clinton in 2016. She is the second major party female nominee. If elected president, she will become the first female and first Asian American president of the United States. Following Herbert Hoover, Richard Nixon, and Ronald Reagan, she would also become the fourth president from California. Furthermore, she is the first Democratic presidential and vice presidential nominee to be from any Western state. She would also become the fifth sitting vice president to be elected president, following John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Martin Van Buren, and George H.W. Bush. Following Hubert, Humphrey, and Walter Mondale, Walz would become the third vice president from Minnesota. On July 22, Harris secured enough delegate endorsements to become the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, and officially became the party's nominee after a formal roll call vote, held from August 1 to August 5. A debate between Harris and Trump is scheduled for September 10 on ABC. Harris began an initial run for the presidency in January 2019, at the time as U.S. Senator from California. In debates, Harris was criticized by opponents over her record as Attorney General of California, notably regarding her past positions on marijuana, cash bail, parole reform, and alleged negligence in investigating police misconduct, among other issues. Stagnant polling and fundraising struggles in November began to signify a possible end to her campaign. Given inconsistencies in staffing, a lack of funds, and a generally poorly managed campaign, she officially withdrew from the Democratic primaries in December 2019. She endorsed Joe Biden on March 8, 2020, and was chosen by Biden to be his running mate on August 11, 2020. After Biden and Harris won the general election, she became the first female vice president of the United States upon her inauguration on January 20, 2021. In October 2023, Harris refused to speculate about what would happen if Biden, the incumbent president and expected Democratic nominee for the 2024 presidential election, were to drop out of the race. Joe Biden's age, which at the time was 80, was being used as a battering ram by Republicans. After the first presidential debate on June 27, 2024, concerns grew about then presumptive nominee Biden's age and fitness to serve a second term. Biden initially pushed back aggressively at the idea that he should drop out. On June 28, New York Magazine wrote that while most Democrats did not want Harris to replace him, she would be the most likely choice if he were to drop out. She had higher approval ratings than Biden and other Democratic contenders for the 2028 presidential election, like Gavin Newsom. On social media, in reaction to the debate, users who wanted Harris as the nominee posted an old clip of her asking an audience, "You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?" You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you, meaning that a person's substance is not created independently, but rather is the result of their environment. This video became an internet meme, and coconuts would become a symbol of Harris's campaign. The attention the video brought towards Harris boosted the idea of her being the nominee. What can be, unburdened by what has been, has similarly surfaced as a meme associated with Harris and her campaign. By July 3, Harris was being discussed as Biden's potential replacement by senior Democrats, and various Democrats' reactions to the choice ranged from acceptance to trepidation to resignation. She defended Biden, saying that the debate wasn't his finest hour but that the outcome of this election cannot be determined by one day in June. Nonetheless, her allies began to strategize on how to make her the Democratic choice if he dropped out. She was a frequent target of speeches during the 2024 Republican National Convention from July 15 to 18, with speakers frequently referring to the Biden-Harris presidency. On July 17, the campaign for Donald Trump, the Republican candidate in the election, refused to select a date for a vice presidential debate with J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, saying that it was unclear who the Democrats' vice presidential nominee would be if Biden were to withdraw. On July 18, The Hill reported that in the next few days, Biden would make a speech about the future of his political career, and that congressional Democrats expected Harris to be the new nominee. By July 19, Democrats were quietly mapping how Harris would win in the election, but other candidates such as Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro were also being considered. Following pressure from Democrats, Biden withdrew from the election on July 21, 2024, and endorsed Harris as his successor. On July 21, 2024, Harris announced her intention to run for the Democratic nomination, and the Biden for President Campaign Committee filed paperwork with the Federal Election Commission to change the name of the committee to Harris for President. On July 22, Harris received enough state delegate endorsements to win the nomination and become the presumptive nominee. While the endorsements were non-binding, CNN estimated on July 23 she had secured enough delegates to win the nomination. The day Biden's withdrawal was announced, Democratic fundraising platform ActBlue reported raising more than $50 million, its largest donation day since Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death in 2020. In the first 24 hours of Harris's candidacy, the presidential campaign raised $81 million in small dollar donations, the highest single-day total of any presidential candidate in history. By August 1, 10 days after the launch of the campaign, the Harris campaign raised $310 million in small dollar donations through ActBlue. In the 24 hours after announcing Tim Walz as running mate, the campaign raised $36 million. Harris held her first campaign rally on July 23, 2024, at the West Allis Central High School Gymnasium in West Allis, Wisconsin. The Republican National Convention had been held a week earlier in nearby Milwaukee. The event reportedly grew a larger audience than any event held by Biden's 2024 campaign, according to campaign spokesperson Kevin Munoz, who had previously expected around 3,000 people to attend. On July 30, Harris held an event in Atlanta at Georgia State University's Convocation Center, telling the crowd of 8,000 people, "Well, Donald, meet me on the debate stage. If you've got something to say it to my face." Megan Thee Stallion and Quavo also performed at the rally. Harris's first rally featuring her running mate, Tim Walz, was held in Philadelphia at Temple University's Liacouras Center on August 6. The campaign said that 12,000 people attended. The next day, Harris and Walz held rallies in Eau Claire, Wisconsin and Romulus, Michigan. An event scheduled for August 8 in Raleigh, North Carolina was postponed due to Hurricane Debbie, as was a planned rally in Savannah, Georgia on August 9. Harris and Walz instead spoke on August 8 in Wayne, Michigan to UAW Local 900, representing workers at Ford's Michigan assembly plant, alongside Sean Fain. Harris and Walz are set to appear on August 9 in Glendale, Arizona at Desert Diamond Arena. U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, Arizona Democratic Party Chair Yolanda Bejarano, Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays, U.S. Representative Greg Stanton, AZ4, and U.S. Senate candidate Ruben Gallego, AZ3, will also speak. At the rally at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport on August 7, Harris was heckled by pro-Palestine protesters, who disrupted the event by chanting slogans. Harris responded by saying, "You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking," following her statement with a withering stare towards the protesters. Harris supporters subsequently drowned out the protesters by cheering and chanting Kamala, as the protesters were escorted out of the venue. Harris is using Beyoncé's song Freedom as the official song for her campaign, having obtained permission from Parkwood Entertainment on the day of her first rally. A digital ad featuring Beyoncé's song Freedom debuted on July 25. On August 8, the Harris campaign released an ad in both English and Spanish, titled Determination, directed towards Latino voters in battleground states. The next day, another ad called Tougher focused on the southern border was released, calling Harris a border state prosecutor. Harris has framed her campaign as a choice between freedom and chaos and based it around the ideals of freedom and the future. The Harris campaign has sought to highlight her experience as an attorney general and a prosecutor to prosecute the case against Trump by pointing out his 34 felony convictions. Harris is running as a moderate Democrat and has moderated several of her policy positions since her 2019 run, with many of her domestic policy stances now expected to resemble Biden's. Harris's stances will also have a particular focus on reproductive health care, criminal justice, and civil rights issues. Another aspect of Harris's campaign messaging has focused on branding Republicans and vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance as weird on multiple occasions. Such comments have come from Harris herself and from allies in the Democratic Party such as Governor Tim Walz, Harris's running mate. During a campaign fundraiser in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Harris said, "You may have noticed, Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record. And some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird. I mean, that's the box you put that in." This and the messaging shift towards freedom is a noted departure from Biden's focus on democracy. Harris supports national protections for abortion, which were reversed after Roe v. Wade, 1973, was overturned by Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, 2022. Under the Biden administration, she prominently campaigned for abortion rights. In March 2024, Harris became the first sitting vice president to visit an abortion clinic, and she told Politico in July 2024 that we need to put into law the protections of Roe. Harris supports efforts to improve racial justice. Harris previously supported the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Harris has supported demilitarizing police departments, and has pushed back against calls to defund the police. Harris was tasked by Biden with protecting democracy through voting rights legislation through her work on the For the People Act. Harris has supported efforts to defend election workers and counter Republican efforts to restrict voting following the 2020 presidential election. Harris is an advocate for environmental justice to address the impact of climate change on lower-income areas and people of color. Under Biden, she supported his climate legislation. Harris helped pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in addressing climate change and clean energy in U.S. history, putting the U.S. on track to meet emissions reduction targets by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. Harris's campaign has stated that she does not support a ban on fracking. Harris supports strengthening the middle class, and is running on a pro-union agenda. Harris has promoted the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, funding for small business, and previously supported an act as senator to provide a $6,000 tax credit for middle and low-income families. Harris has promised to address price gouging, bring down costs, ban hidden fees and late charges from financial institutions, limit unfair rent increases and cap prescription drug costs, which she has said would lower costs and save many middle-class families thousands of dollars a year. Harris has made the freedom to live safe from gun violence an important plank of her campaign. Harris has expressed support for red flag laws, universal background checks, and a prohibition of the sale of assault weapons to civilians. As Vice President, Harris oversaw the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Harris has supported efforts to strengthen coverage under the Affordable Care Act, including setting caps on seniors' out-of-pocket prescription drug prices at $2,000 and limiting the cost of insulin for those on Medicare to $35 enacted as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Harris has been a proponent of White House efforts to ban medical debt from credit reports. Harris has stated she no longer supports a single-payer healthcare system. In 2023, as Vice President, Harris announced pledges of $950 million from private companies into Central American communities to address the causes of mass migration, such as poverty. She supported a bipartisan bill which would have closed the border if too crowded and fund Border Patrol agents that was rejected by Trump, who called on House and Senate Republicans to kill the bill, arguing that it would hurt his and Republicans' re-election campaigns and deny them the ability to run on immigration as a campaign issue. Harris states she believes the immigration system is broken and needs to be fixed, and she says most Americans believe this. Her campaign video introduced on July 30, 2024, says, Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents and paints Trump as unserious on border security. Harris is a strong supporter of LGBTQ people's rights. In 2022, President Joe Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act, which requires states to recognize same-sex marriages and interracial marriages, even as the Supreme Court took aim at marriage equality. At the signing ceremony, Harris and others gave speeches, and Biden presented Harris with a pen as recognition of years of work for marriage equality. In 2023, Harris visited the Stonewall Inn and denounced legislative attacks on transgender rights in states across the country. In July 2024, Harris conducted a fundraiser in the LGBTQ hotspot of Provincetown, Massachusetts. Harris has supported the expanded child tax credit enacted in the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 that reduced child poverty by 20%. Harris has expressed support for making child care and elder care more affordable and enacting paid family leave. Harris has also expressed support for student debt relief. During the 2020 vice presidential debate, Harris criticized former President Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs on Chinese imports, accusing Republicans of losing the trade war with China and losing hundreds of thousands of jobs as a result. Harris has advocated for de-risking from Beijing, a policy that encourages reducing Western economic dependence on China. Harris is expected to continue deepening American alliances in Asia and the Pacific with the intention of curbing China's rising power both economically and militarily. Harris has previously spoken out against human rights abuses in Hong Kong and co-sponsored the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. As a senator, she condemned the persecution of Uyghur and minority women in Western China and sponsored Marco Rubio's sanctions punishing human rights abuses in the region, and during the 2019 debates also criticized China for stealing our products, including our intellectual property, and for dumping substandard products into our economy. Harris has previously stated her support of Taiwan's self-defense, criticized Chinese naval harassment of Philippine vessels, and supported freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Harris meeting Narendra Modi in Washington, D.C., in 2021. In 2019, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi repealed Article 370, ending the semi-autonomous status of Indian-administered Kashmir. Harris rebuked the move, saying we must remind Kashmiris that they are not alone in the world. In 2023, Harris entertained Modi at a state dinner and praised the Indian Prime Minister for his leadership. Harris meeting with Israeli President Isaac Herzog, top, and UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, bottom, in discussions on the war and ensuing humanitarian crisis. A supporter of the two-state solution, Harris is seen as more sympathetic to Palestinians than Biden, who has described himself as a Zionist and has a long history with Israeli leaders. Despite that, Analysts expect that U.S. policy toward Israel would not be greatly affected if Harris is elected. Regarding the Israel-Hamas war, analysts expect Harris to continue Biden's approach. Following Hamas's attack on Israel in 2023, Harris strongly supported Israel's offensive, stating that the threat Hamas poses to the people of Israel must be eliminated. However, she has since criticized Israel's approach and the Gaza humanitarian crisis. In March 2024, Harris opposed Israel's invasion of Rafah, called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and stated that the situation in Gaza is a humanitarian catastrophe. She has described young Americans who are protesting against Israel's actions in Gaza as showing exactly what the human emotion should be, but said she absolutely rejects some of their statements, despite understanding the emotion behind it. In a speech, Harris was described by USA Today as coming close to accusing Israel of war crimes when she said international humanitarian law must be respected in the conflict. Former Biden administration officials said in an interview to Politico that Harris was less committed to the Israel policy and that one was cautiously optimistic she would change it. Harris also declined to preside over a speech by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on July 24, instead going to a campaign event. 114 After the speech, she condemned pro-Hamas protesters, pro-Hamas graffiti, and the burning of an American flag at Union Station. The next day, after she met with Netanyahu, she said, "Israel has a right to defend itself, and how it does so matter." She continued that Israel must agree to a ceasefire and hostage deal and work towards a two-state solution, emphasizing Palestinian suffering. 116 Before the rally, Harris had interacted with the co-founders of the uncommitted protest movement, hearing stories from family members about the war. One activist began crying when describing the personal impact the conflict had on them. The activists said they wanted to endorse her, but wanted an arms embargo on Israel first. Harris reportedly agreed to meet with the activists, and was described by them as sympathetic. However, Harris's national security advisor said that she did not support an embargo. Harris is expected and has signaled to generally follow Biden's foreign policy on NATO and Ukraine, supporting both in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. While Harris described herself as not a protectionist Democrat during a 2019 primary debate, she has been critical of past free trade deals, stating she would have voted against the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, of 1992 and the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, of 2016, and in 2020 voted against the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. However, trade has never been a major focus for Harris, so her positions aren't entirely known. The Center for Strategic and International Studies notes that she has said so little about trade that most analysts have to dig up these old votes and statements and assume that she will continue Biden's policies. For instance, President Biden has maintained most of Trump's tariffs on China and increased some of them, and so likely won't make significant changes. The Cato Institute in 2020 noted that while Harris does not seem to be an economic nationalist, her terms of engagement are a bit unclear other than that she wants more labor and environmental protections. The Democratic Party quickly coalesced around her following Biden's withdrawal and his endorsement of Harris. The vast majority of congressional Democrats endorsed Harris, including senior officials such as Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, and former Speaker and House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. Additionally, all Democratic governors have endorsed Harris. On July 21, former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton endorsed Harris. On July 26, former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama endorsed Harris in a joint statement. On August 3, Jimmy Carter, the oldest surviving Democratic former president, endorsed Harris. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for President of the United States in 2024, considered several prominent individuals before selecting Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota as her running mate on August 6. Harris and Walz were certified as the official nominees that evening by Democratic National Committee Secretary Jason Rae. Tim Walz is the first sitting Democratic governor to be picked as a vice presidential nominee since Charles W. Bryan of Nebraska in 1924, and if elected, would be the third vice president from Minnesota after Hubert, Humphrey and Walter Mondale. The Harris-Walz ticket will face the Trump-Vance ticket in the general election. During Joe Biden's re-election campaign, Kamala Harris was presumed the Democratic Party nominee for a second term as Vice President of the United States. Biden competed in the Democratic presidential primaries facing only token opposition and became the presumptive nominee on March 12. However, amidst concerns about his age and ability to serve as president, Biden withdrew from the election on July 21 and endorsed Harris to replace him as the presidential nominee. Harris launched her own presidential campaign that same day and became the presumptive nominee the following day. Harris secured enough delegate support to become the presumptive nominee on July 22. Her campaign's vetting process for potential running mates was conducted by Eric Holder, the former U.S. Attorney General under President Barack Obama, along with his law firm Covington & Burling VI and Dana Remus, formerly President Biden's White House counsel. Harris was the only qualified candidate, with a virtual roll call vote taking place from August 1 until August 5. On August 2, the New York Times reported that former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs Elizabeth M. Allen would lead Harris's running mate team and begin serving as their chief of staff the following day. The Harris campaign conducted polling and focus groups on the candidates and found that all three finalists could help her win. Politico reported on July 30 that Harris planned to hold a rally with her running mate choice in Philadelphia on August 6, raising speculation that the pick was the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. However, a campaign aide for Harris cautioned against causing speculation behind Philadelphia being chosen as the venue for the rally. The reported that Harris was expected to make an announcement on her running mate choice hours before the Philadelphia rally. On the morning of August 6, awaiting Harris's decision, the United States Secret Service said it was ready to swiftly provide security to whomever the running mate was. Later on, August 6, Harris chose Walz. An official reported to ABC News on July 23 that Kelly and Shapiro were the leading candidates, while another source told Talking Points Memo the following day that Roy Cooper was an additional top choice. On July 23, the Financial Times reported that Cooper, Kelly, and Shapiro had become the front-runners, with donors preferring Cooper or Shapiro and Hollywood Democrats backing Kelly. On July 24, the New York Times reported that Walz was also under serious consideration. On July 26, the Washington Post reported that Cooper, Kelly, and Shapiro were at the top of Harris's shortlist according to people close to the campaign. MSNBC also reported that the three front-runners are reportedly at the top of a shortening list. Bloomberg News, however, reported on July 27 that Kelly, Shapiro, and Walz were the three finalists. On July 28, USA Today reported Andy Beshear as one of the most prominent potential running mates being vetted by the Harris campaign. On July 29, CNBC reported that Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was on the short list as Harris's running mate. On July 29, the New York Times reported Cooper had voluntarily withdrawn his name from consideration. As of July 29, 2024, Andy Beshear, Mark Kelly, Josh Shapiro, and Tim Walz were reported to be on Harris's shortlist by various media outlets. On July 30, The Hill reported that several progressive leaders and political groups urged Harris to pick Beshear or Walz as her running mate over Shapiro as an attempt to consolidate key voting groups, and the Democratic base. Politico reported on July 30 that Harris planned on interviewing potential running mates in the following days. The Hill also reported on July 30 that while Harris had not yet finalized her running mate choice, she planned on campaigning with her eventual choice in several battleground states the following week. That same day, CBS News reported that Harris will start interviewing her shortlist candidates as early as the next day, with Beshear, Buttigieg, Kelly, Shapiro, and Walz being cited as the campaign's top-tier list. However, a report from CNN on the same day cited Kelly, Shapiro, and Walz as top contenders, while people close to the selection process stated that Beshear and Buttigieg were not top contenders despite being in conversation. On August 1, NBC News reported that the Harris campaign's vetting team had formally met with 6 finalists: Beshear, Buttigieg, Kelly, Shapiro, Walz, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Pritzker had previously denied receiving vetting materials in July. However, towards the end of the month it was reported he had undergone 2 vetting interviews. That same day, Bloomberg News and Politico reported that Harris's vetting team had met privately with Kelly and Shapiro. The New York Times reported that day that the vetting process, led by Eric Holder, was completed. That same report found that out of the 6 finalists, Shapiro, Kelly, and Walz were considered to be top contenders, while acknowledging that Beshear, Buttigieg and Pritzker were part of the 6 finalists that Harris had narrowed down to. On August 4, Harris interviewed Shapiro, Kelly, and Walz in person at the No. 1 Observatory Circle, as finalists. Following this, on August 5, it was reported the selection narrowed down to Walz and Shapiro. However, Harris didn't decide on August 5, deciding to sleep on it and inform her running mate in the morning. On August 6, Harris chose Walz. As of August 2, Harris has been shown to be narrowly leading in some general election polls and narrowly trailing in others. Thank you for watching this video.